we'll basically be talking about phase 1 of practice. It shouldn't take too long. I'm hoping to keep it nice and concise and kind of bullet point style, and then I'll do a quick demo of, I recorded some stuff. We'll just do a demo of like what it would look like in a kind of condensed form, and what we should be aiming at, and that'll be it for the night. And you guys are, as always, just feel free to ask any questions, stop me anytime you want. For a little bit of background, I will start streaming, and just let me know if the audio gets in the way of me talking. So let's see, can you guys see that now?
Yep.
Okay, is the audio distracting?
No, it's not too bad.
Okay, cool, sounds good. If it starts to get distracting, just let me know, but yeah, we should be good. Okay, so phase 1 of practice. So last time we talked about basically practice as a whole, what we should be aiming at. We talked about 3 phases. So the first one being, getting used to the car, acquainted with the track, kind of getting our bearings. Phase 2 being building consistency and learning new skills, or practicing skills at least. And then phase 3 kind of being the fine-tuning, race practice, being around other cars more often, all that kind of stuff. And so today we'll do a little bit more of a deep dive into phase 1, so learning the track. And the first question I think you kind of want to ask yourself when you're going into practice for the week is, do you want to be studying other people's data or videos prior to ever getting on track? And I think the ideal answer to that question is no. The only caveat being if you have limits on time. So if you're only able to practice 2 hours in the week or something like that, I would actually recommend going and looking at example laps right away before you ever turn a wheel. And that's just because what you're wanting to do is gain as much information as quickly as possible in order to be able to, to get up to speed as quickly as possible. The reason that you would ideally not want to do that is because it's easier to watch someone else drive fast and try and copy it, but it's more useful to learn what it's like to get faster on your own. And what I mean by that is, when you're driving on your own without any prior information, what starts happening is you start to feel the car, you start to feel the track, you learn how the car is behaving on your own without that kind of prior information of like, okay, this is where I need to brake, and this is where I need to turn in. So if you learn to do that on your own, and get a feel for how that works and how that kind of incremental process of finding out the limits of the car, if you do that on your own, you're going to be much more able to deal with kind of changes in the car and track over the period of a race, and you're going to learn the skills required to understand why we need to do certain things, brake at certain places, all that kind of stuff faster, because you've learned it on your own rather than just trying to copy someone else doing it well. So the main goal of the kind of first phase, or phase 1 overall, is we want to drive around the track until we know where all the soft limits are. And soft limits being, it's not your kind of 100% absolute best braking spot. What we're talking about is a rough area to be braking in. We're talking about safe track limits. So when you're on the exit of a turn, like, what's 90% of the limit, I would say. You're not going right to the ragged edge where the car's just on the balance of grip. We're kind of 90% there, and that's what we're trying to achieve in this phase 1 of practice. Is we want to be able to know where those soft limits are, and basically once that's done, then we can move on to phase 2, because we have a good idea of what's happening on the track. We have a good idea of what's happening with the car, and then we can build on that with the skills and kind of consistency that we're going to build up through phase 2. So that's basically the first part, and that kind of gives us a good idea of how long phase 1 lasts. Depending on your skill level, I would say phase 1, I break it down into 2 spots, but I would into 2 different kind of sections of phase 1, but I would say phase 1 overall probably lasts you about an hour to an hour and a half at the max, and then as your skill level increases and you get more and more used to learning tracks and learning the car, that may reduce down to about half an hour. And so you can really start to make quick gains fast once you learn how to get out on track and learn the limits of the car and the track pretty quickly. So the first few laps, and this is the first section of phase 1 of practice, as I just basically call it the first few laps, I would aim for about 10 to 20 laps, roughly half an hour. And again, this can be tailored to however fast you learn a track. You kind of know your own pace already, but it's a good starting point. 10 to 20 laps, and what you want to do here is you really want to drive within yourself. Your priority is on not crashing and very slowly building speed. What you're really trying to do here is understand all the particularities of the track. Where does it dip down? Where is it off camber? Where is it, where is there a lot of camber that you can take advantage of when you're braking uphill, downhill? How do you have to position the car to get to track limits, but doing that safely, all that kind of stuff. In this phase, we're completely forgetting lap time. We really don't, we shouldn't have a lap time target in mind. We ideally, like I said, we haven't watched a video, so we don't have some alien lap speed in our mind that we're trying to roughly get close to. None of that kind of stuff, because that's just going to distract us from the overall goal, which is really just getting comfortable in the car and understanding what's happening with the car and track interaction. We're looking for natural points of understeer, oversteer, where we're locking up, where's it tricky points in the track, and we're basically just building our base knowledge. We're not trying to fix any of the issues yet. We're just trying to learn what those issues are. So every track is going to have difficult spots. If we talk about this week at Silverstone, the car naturally has some understeer, obviously, through the fast sections, and that's going to be car dependent. But most cars, the overarching theme of the fast section through there in sector 1 is understeer. So how do we deal with that? And then turn 1 is high speed as well. So when do we come off the throttle? Do we brake? All that kind of stuff. Don't make any setup changes. That's another important point. It clouds your judgment in terms of what you're learning from the track, all those kind of baseline track and car characteristics. If you're making setup changes during this time, it's going to start to feel different, and that really affects how you learn what's going on. So that's phase 1, where the main goal is not to crash. So you want to be able to do your 10 to 20 laps and never go back to the pits. Ideally, you haven't spun. Maybe you locked up a time or two, but that will allow you to have that kind of consistent pace, and without any pressure, right? Like, this is a fun time. We get to go out there. We haven't put any expectations on ourselves. We're going out, and you can almost see it as like, just enjoying driving. So that's how I kind of characterize phase 1. That's the first few laps, 10 to 20 laps, as I said, or half an hour. The second phase, and I kind of call the second phase pushing closer to our natural limit. And what I mean by natural limit is, we all as drivers have a kind of a skill base and a knowledge base that means we're in a rough time bracket at each individual track. So maybe we're 104% off of alien lap time in terms of our general pace. Maybe we're 103, maybe we're 106. But with our combination of skill and knowledge, we're all in a rough area. And we can't do much about that rough area in phase 1 of practice. And we're not trying to. We're not trying to get naturally faster. We're just trying to get to the place where we're trying to get to the max lap time that our natural skill and knowledge will allow. And that usually happens pretty quickly. We all are at a certain level of using track limits. We're all at a certain level of braking. And so naturally that comes pretty quickly. And that's what we're aiming for in the second phase of practice. And I would put this phase again at roughly about half an hour. So this time what we're doing is we're starting to get, like I said, we're starting to get closer to our current knowledge and skill limit. We want to build speed, but we shouldn't yet be looking at lap times again. We're just trying to push things physically further. So, you've built that base in the first 15 to 20 laps, roughly half an hour, and now you kind of roughly know where that breaking point is. So now you start to edge it closer to where you think the absolute breaking point is. You start to edge your exits a little bit closer to the curbing, all that kind of stuff. And this all happens naturally. And again, some people this will be happening way quicker. It might only take the first phase of phase 1, that kind of just getting used to the track, may only take 3 or 4 laps, and then you move on to the second phase a little bit quicker. So yeah, we start to move a little bit closer to the edge of the track, limit of where we feel comfortable, braking, turning in, getting on power, all that kind of stuff. We can start to explore a little bit in this phase as well. So if there's a portion of the track with maybe, let's say it's a little bit more off camber on the exit, so we say, okay, maybe I'll try braking a little bit later, and taking a little bit later apex as well, so I can try and avoid and cut in and not have to deal with that off camber section as much. So that's where, this is the stage where we're experimenting a little bit with with how the track is laid out, and the track characteristics, and that's totally okay. Again, we're not looking at lap time, the overall lap time, but if you noticed in this section that you do something different and you're 10th up, well, now you've learned something about the track. You haven't improved your driving, you've just changed your approach to better suit the track, and that's that's what we can do and start to do in this section as well. Grabbing a different gear at a different time, braking cadence, all that kind of stuff. And we're able to do that because we're now more comfortable with what the car is doing with the track, because we have that baseline from the first section of just getting used to the track. Importantly, this phase, it's not for skill improvement. So again, we're still trying to find the outer limits of the track. Again, we're not getting to 100%. We maybe get to 90% in the first one. Maybe we try to get to 95 in the second one. It's we're not absolutely pushing all out. It's just every lap is kind of a very small increase from what we did the lap before, and that allows us to build a nice and consistent baseline where we can slowly work up to the max rather than trying to get to the max right away. And that's when we risk and often do go over the limit, and that's when we lock up, crash, all that stuff, and that completely ruins our momentum. So that's a pretty, that's a basic understanding of phase 1, and the final portion of it is, once we're done the on-track part of it, we should be very close to our natural or knowledge limit, and that's when we want to start examining first your replay, because we all know that we're not perfect. So you first examine your replay, and you feel that you're kind of at your max lap time. And one good way of feeling that out is, so in the first phase, as you're getting slowly up to speed, obviously your lap time's always going to be improving, because initially you're braking quite early, you're not using all the exit, you're not getting on at power as early as you normally might. So you're not going as fast as you could initially, obviously, but we slowly start to build that speed up, and then into the second phase, when we're exploring things and getting closer to that limit, we'll actually notice that our lap times will start, like that, the chunk that you improve by will get smaller and smaller and smaller, and eventually you'll probably be doing lap times, again depending on how long the track is, but probably be doing lap times within 3 to 4 tenths, maybe even less of each other. And once we hit that phase, that's when we kind of, you will also know, like, oh, I did something wrong in this corner, and that's why I'm a little bit slower. Or, oh, I did this corner really well, so that's why I'm a 10th up on this lap. So you even begin to know where you can improve, where you've done really well. And then beyond a certain lap time, you're like, I don't really know how I would do better in this corner. And that's kind of a good indication of when phase 1 is done, because you've built yourself up slowly. You've probably improved as well, because by going slower, you tend to learn a little bit more, but it's more of a byproduct than our actual end goal. So when you start to see that kind of lap time plateau, your phase one is done. You can go and examine your replay, and you can that's when you start to figure out like where you're not on a limit, where can you use more track, where should you maybe alter your line slightly, and then once you've done that, then ideally you go and look at other people's data or videos. That's when you go and look at the Alien example lap. That's when you go to look at Motec data from other people if it's available to you. If you're in other sims, then there's different things available to you as well, and then begins the real learning part of it, where you're improving that baseline knowledge that you have. So let's say you started at 60% of overall knowledge for that week. You've gotten up to that 60, and that's given you whatever lap time that's given you. The second phase then begins, or the end of phase one, depending on how you see it, and then now you're trying to up that kind of base level of knowledge and skill from 60 to 65, let's say. I mean, that's a huge jump, but just for the sake of argument. So that's basically phase one in a nutshell. It's probably the easiest phase. It may be the most fun phase as well, because you're just going out there, pure joy of driving, have fun with the car, learn the track, don't push it too much, and that sets up a really good base of knowledge for what you're going to do through the rest of your practice. I'll stop there because that's kind of the end of the theory. Any questions as of yet?
Josiah, when you're talking about when we're analyzing our consistency, would you consider, so if we go out and we run 15 or 20 straight laps, are we aiming for anything less, like to keep that less than a half a second apart, or do you think it needs to be tighter than that before we start pushing, trying to find the limit? You know what I mean?
So yeah. So the first 15 to 20 laps that you do in that kind of first section of phase one I was talking about, like, I wouldn't worry about consistency almost at all. And the reason for that is simply because you're still trying to examine what's going on with the car and the track. So it's not, you're not, like, the whole idea, I guess, in a good way to put it, is like, you're not trying, like, the goal of phase one isn't necessarily to get to that level of consistency. It's just once you hit that level of consistency, that's an indicator that your phase one is done, if you see the difference. So like you'll be going around the track and all of a sudden you'll be like, oh, like I'm within half a second to 4/10 every single lap. Maybe I've kind of hit my plateau. And for that gap will be very different for different people, right? Like, obviously, the closer are to rookie you are, that consistency gap will be much larger. The top guys, when they're doing this and they're phase one, even though they may not think about it as phase one, but when they're doing that, their consistency gap is probably going to be 1/10 to 2/10, and that's just they're better than we are.
Okay.
So yeah, I wouldn't, definitely not in the first phase of phase one, I wouldn't at all worry about consistency. In the second, maybe a little bit more, but again, we're still experimenting a little bit. We're kind of getting closer to pushing the limit. The one thing I will say is, obviously, let's say for a given corner, you start, it's a long braking zone, for example. Let's say going into forgetting all the Silverstone corner names, but the hard braking zone before the long, like the left and then the long right-hander. Like, let's say you start braking at 150 meters, and then you slowly move your way up to 100. But as you begin to push that braking zone smaller and smaller, your actual variance in your braking zone will also get smaller and smaller, which means you will be more consistent lap on lap, right? Do you know what I'm saying there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and as you begin to do that at every single corner, you will just become more consistent as you get closer and closer to what your skill limit and the car, obviously, are allowing you to do. So, yeah, it kind of goes hand in hand with knowing, beginning to know the track quite well, and then beginning to push the car a little more. Your consistency will naturally increase because you are reducing your margin of error, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's
Okay.
good.
Good. Any other questions before we move on to some, just like I think it's like a 6 or 7 lap kind of condensed example of these two things? No? Alright, sounds good. You'll have to bear with me as I load it up, because it's not this one. I may have to reshare this, I think. Okay. Yes. Yeah, so we'll give it a minute or two. I did have one other thing which I wanted to mention, which I've now forgotten. But yeah, phase 1, I would say that kind of hour to hour and a half. If you follow the kind of general practice guide, and everyone will have a slightly different way of doing it. So, obviously it's not the Bible. You don't need to follow it 100%. So what I would say is eventually you guys could all probably reduce phase 1 overall to roughly half hour to 45 minutes. Again, depending on if you don't know the track, it's always going to be longer. And it should be longer. Like, don't try and rush through phase 1, especially on a new track, because you're going to hurt yourself later on. You're going to make all your other practice less effective if you tried to go into phase 2 too quickly. So yeah, take your time with it, but it eventually will get quite quick. So yeah, don't feel like if you hit that plateau of lap times without having looked at someone else's lap time or someone else's data, if you hit that quickly, and you feel like you don't, there's really a feeling of like, I don't know how I would get faster, even though I know I can be. Don't, feel free to move on from phase 1, start looking at data. So we'll just follow this a little bit and change the angle. So this would basically be a good example of, you know what, I might just change the angle here because it doesn't there. That's better. A good example of the first few laps of getting used to it. So, you're braking quite early, and you'll see, I'll leave this up here so you can see my inputs. Like, everything is going to be very, like, really not close to the limit, even though, I'm using all the track here, but you'll see, like, I could have slowed down a lot later. I could have carried a lot more speed through here.
You're not sharing your screen, by the way.
Oh, thank you for letting me know. I would have gone through that whole thing thinking I was. Half a second.
I mean, I can probably picture it in my mind, but
not as effective.
Yeah,
all right.
That was good.
All right, that should be good now, yeah?
Yeah, I see it now.
Okay, cool. So yeah, as I was saying, no, there you go. We'll leave that up. Can you guys now see my pedal inputs on the bottom left there?
Yes.
Yep. Okay,
perfect. So yeah, you'll obviously I won't be carrying as much speed in the corners, all that kind of stuff. And again, you're just looking for like how grippy are the curbs, how much does it rotate the car, can I go out to the grass here, how well does the car slow down at each corner, at this corner, for example, just here, like, am I going to experience understeer? Probably yes, going through that right-hander, because the car is going to still be trying to rotate the other way. How slippy is the exit at this corner? And you're just trying to build a bank of knowledge here. So again, that's why lap time is so not important, because we're just, we're building, it's the basic building blocks before we get into the meat of our practice. Sections like this that are especially difficult, we all, this same track as in ACC. I just don't have ACC downloaded right now, so all that kind of stuff of like figuring out where the problem areas are, where we might need to work a little bit more. Where were we getting the off tracks, the invalidated lap times? We do that affects our races, all that kind of stuff. So really not taking it too far into the braking zones. We really want to have a fairly big margin of error on our first 2-3 laps if we know the track well, and then if we don't know the track or we haven't been there in a long time, we don't remember the braking zones, like probably for 5 or 6, 7 laps we want a really big margin of error, and then we're able to work slowly into it. So on the second lap, like you'll notice, I'm already a little bit later into the braking zone, and pushing it a little bit more, just trying to figure out, like, okay, if I'm at a higher speed, now what are the curbs doing? So it's, it's that incremental. Every single time we go through a corner, we're adding a layer of knowledge, and just a small layer, because if it's too big of a layer, then you've missed all the layers in between, right? So, if you're aiming at 100%, you don't want to go to 150. You start at, let's say you start at 75. We don't want to go to 125, because when we've missed that entire section, we've missed 50% of the information. If we start at 75 and we go to 85, well, it's like, okay, I can kind of guess this is roughly 85. I can feel it in the car. I can feel it in the steering. I can feel it in how I was slowing down. And then, then you have a better idea of where 90 and 95 are than if you went all the way to 125, because 125 is kind of just a mess. For example, on this lap, like I think I cut this corner too much, so I got an off track. So then I'm already building that, like, okay, I need to be careful here. I can't just attack that curb like super aggressively. I'll get an off track or invalidated lap. And also, a lot of cars in ACC don't take those curbs very well. So it's like, okay, I know I need to be careful throughout the race on that curb. And then here I experienced some understeer just on the exit of that final corner. So it's like, do I need to get the car slowed down a little bit more? Do I need to turn in and take more curb? And so basically I would say at the end of this lap, like, that was a very condensed version of phase 1. So I was, first lap I was probably running at about 70%. The second lap I was probably running about 80-85%. And now we're into the second phase where we're just, every single time I go through here, I'm braking a little bit later, and then just feeling what the car's doing as I ask a little bit more of it. Can I go wider and still make the next turn? And then I believe on this lap, so I'll just fast forward here. So I believe on the previous 2 laps I had used, I think I'd used 3rd gear, going for the left-hander coming up. Let's just see here. So then I was like, okay, well, let's try 4th. Does it make the car more stable? No, I went in 3rd. So it was the following lap. So that's right. I experienced a little bit of like looseness in the car, and I wasn't even going 100%. So I was like, okay, well, if I'm going 100%, I'm definitely going to have looseness in the car. Should I try 4th gear on the following lap? So, and what we'll see here. So let's do chase here, and let's just see where I end up braking. So if we, I'll back it up. So, this lap around, I start to brake a little bit later. I brake just before this, this little access road here. And then, so then we continue, and we'll see that. So this lap, I tried it in 4th. Where's my cockpit view? Well, that's scenic. There we go. So, I believe it was this lap I tried it in 4th. Slow it down, take the curb, and I'm like, oh wow, this thing, I had a little bit of oversteer there, but it was like, because I was getting on the power so much more, so I was like, it was way more stable. I had a good line through there, so now 4th is the gear to use through there. And this is, I haven't watched any videos from, from the pro guys or anything. This is just me, trying to figure out what works best. And then for this lap, I also added a little bit of, I think I added some throttle as I was going over the first curb. Let's just see if that was the case. Yeah, so a little bit of throttle to get the nose up prior to hitting the curb, so it's not as bad, because obviously the previous lap had felt kind of iffy. So then if we go to the next braking zone here, we'll go back to this one. apologies for the dog. Let's just see where I ended up braking. So a little bit later, right? Like, actually, it's quite a bit later given how fast we're coming at this, but a little bit later, maybe half a car, we start braking. And then how does the car respond? Well, I can still clip the apex there. So perfect. Now I know with that brake application, I can brake there safely with this amount of fuel. Obviously, it can vary a little bit, but that's a new bank of information. And I was like, well, I could probably brake even later than that, or at least I'll try just a tiny little bit later than that next lap around. So that's that kind of slow building. And now we're into the, at this point, we're into the phase where I'm probably running at about, I wouldn't say 90%. It's probably 80, in between 85 and 90% pushing. Pushing is probably the wrong word, but 85 to 90% pace-wise. And then tricky corners like this, like okay, how stable is a car through it if I'm really pushing harder? And basically still just building up that baseline. And then let's go to, we can kind of ignore this. The red lap was my fastest one, but that honestly was a fluke and I had a pretty big track cut. So we'll go to the fastest lap of the session, which happened to be the last one, and we'll see that I'm much more on the limit. But what I want you guys to notice is I started, the first slow lap was a 44.4. The next lap is over a second faster. Now, the first lap I was kind of exaggerating a little bit. I probably wouldn't have gone that slow if I, wasn't trying to make a point. But I probably would have been like either a 44 dead or a low 43. So that's the first lap. Just getting used to things, letting the tires warm up. Not cooking the tires so that we can do 10, 15 laps, no problem. Then we're into the 43s. Then we're down to 42, mid 42s. Then we do 42.7. Okay, now we're into the 41s. That was quite a good lap. Very low 42s, 41.9, 41.8. So we see these three laps are like quite close to each other, even this one here. And then, so that's a kind of indication like, okay, I'm beginning, all my laps are beginning to look pretty similar pace-wise. And obviously you got to combine that with how you're feeling in the car, right? If your lap times are similar, but you're like, no, I know I can get more out of the car still without looking at any additional info or analyzing, my driving from an outside view like we're doing now, like just in the car doing the laps. You're like, no, I've messed up in a bunch of places. I know there's things I can still fix while driving. Do that. And then, but, for me here doing this, I was like, okay, I'm getting relatively, I can maybe find another 2/10, but I'm getting relatively close to the limit. So this is the final lap here where I was pushing a fair amount harder. So actually we'll just back that up real quick. So where did we start braking? Here. So, getting pretty close to the limit. We're almost all the way past the access road, and if we remember, the first place we were braking was here, our midpoint was here, our third one was here, and now we're braking here. So we slowly built up to a pretty late braking point. Car still turns in nicely, so I might even be able to brake a little bit later. I've got the feel of the turn in here now. And then, this section, as we know in ACC, is pretty difficult, but carrying a lot more speed in here. We've got the braking cadence pretty well. Might have been able more on exit. And then later braking here as well. And we'll notice going into this next one, I'll speed it up. But we're even, before I was braking at the 50, or actually on board, it looks like it's at the 50. So yeah, 50s disappear. Before I was braking, here, and now we're braking a little bit later, and we're taking a later apex. That was the other thing that I was doing here. So trying to get the car rotated in a little bit differently. And then pushing through Acqua Minerale here as well. Riding that curb nice and well, some brake. And then, and this is all, I'm doing this because, we've created that baseline of knowledge. Like I know from incrementally increasing speed that the car's still stable doing it. So the next time I increase a little bit more, I'm like, okay, is the car still stable? Is it doing what I want it to do? So that's why you're able to do that after, not at the beginning. So if you do it at the beginning, you don't know the car's stable and it spins. It's like you've just ruined that lap, and you haven't gone through all the other corners following that to get more information. So braking, much later than was initially here. Good run through here because I know what the curbs are going to do to the car. And then I skipped forward, but you get the idea. So my fastest, real legal lap here was the 1:41.8. And that was pretty close to where I would say I would probably want to start looking at outside information to be able to improve that lap time. So that's a basic kind of rundown of what it should look like. And you notice, like, I didn't spin out on any lap. I didn't even really outbrake myself. So there's no like real big anomaly here in terms of lap time. Maybe this 42.7, I can't remember what I did here, but that's the only one. And even that's, not that far off. So it builds that consistency and like, just driving for a long, because in the race we need to do, was it 45, 50 minutes? I can't remember what it is now, of actual race without messing up, without crashing, and we need that baseline of what it feels like to do a full stint. And if all we're doing in practice is little, mini 5-lap runs because we keep going too hard, it really doesn't set us up well for the race. So that's, a little mini example of how the first phase should look like. And this was only 8 laps. I probably would have done a little bit more. I probably would have got to 15, and that would have been just a little bit over half an hour, and that would have been my phase 1. Like, I think that's, at this point, probably all I need in my phase 1 at a track that I know. If I was going to Bathurst, I haven't driven Bathurst in a while. It's quite a difficult track. All that kind of stuff. It would take me longer. But a track that I know in a car I'm relatively comfortable with, roughly half an hour is probably all I need for phase 1, and you guys might be quite similar. But again, you extend it as long as you need to extend it because it's the baseline for the rest of your practice. The final thing I will say, and is what I couldn't remember before, is don't forget that as you increase your speed through the corner, and you're aiming to brake later in the next one as you slowly kind of increase that base, don't forget that you're coming in to the following corner later. So, like, let's pick this lap here. So, through here, let's say I get on throttle earlier than I did last time, and then I'm faster through here. By the time I get to this braking zone here, like, don't forget that you're not operating from the same initial speed. Like, let's see, I started braking here. So we're at 223 kilometers an hour on this lap. And then on the previous lap, when we're coming up, let's just see what we're at when we start braking. Pretty similar. So actually, in this case, it's the same. But don't forget that if you've carried more speed through the previous corner, you're going to end up, like, don't try and really outbrake yourself, because then, if you're coming in, if last lap you came in 100 kilometers an hour, and now you're coming, because you did it better, you increased your speed, you're coming in at 110, you have to factor that extra speed when you're braking. Just, one thing to note as you're building up, because obviously you're changing the curve kind of thing. So yeah, that's it for tonight. I think I finally managed to keep it at a reasonable amount of time. But yeah, any questions, comments? Yeah, go ahead.
At this point in the phasing, would you still not touch setup at all? As far as, like, sometimes certain tracks, I think we all go in with a base setup of something that, from previous times on the track or whatever. But at what point, when do you think it's time to start trying to dial in a car for maybe a specific corner or anything, or do you not want to get into that yet?
You mean in terms of actual car setup?
Yes.
I would say probably at the end of phase 1 is when you would start doing that. So you might even consider it like a phase 1.5 of like, okay, so I've got my baseline of how the car is reacting with whatever setup I have on it at the moment, whether that's a setup you have from before and works well, or whether you're using one of the baseline setups and you've got maybe a couple changes in mind. So if you're if you're noticing an overall tendency for oversteer on exit and understeer on oversteer on entry and understeer on exit throughout the whole lap, then you go, okay, like maybe I'll make a few clicks change on my diff, and then you can but the reason you're able to do that effectively is because you've got, let's say, 30 laps under your belt of consistent running. Because without that, it may just be a question of you're not driving the corner properly initially, just because you don't remember right, or it's probably not a new car for most of us because we're all running one car for the season. But you know what I mean? It's just it's that process of learning the track again and getting good at recognizing what a car is doing. So I would kind of pick a setup that you're relatively comfortable with, and even honestly, even the baseline ones are totally fine to do phase one with. Make it through phase one, and then be if there's some overall tendencies that you find are really hurting you, or there's one particular corner where you feel like you're just losing a lot of time, then maybe go out and make a few changes, give that a go for 10 laps, something like that, and see if it helps things and it helps your overall lap time. But you'll only be able to recognize that kind of stuff in a real manner once you've got enough laps under your belt. That's how I'd put it.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And then for me personally, I do use setups from setup shops. So I very rarely change setup. I do know basics of car setup. ACC is well, it's tough. It all sims are kind of setup dependent. There's always more to be found in your driving than there is in setup, but I think a basic understanding of how to change things, especially on the kind of suspension, chassis, and then your aero balance is a really good thing. But I always kind of try and caution people away from getting lost in making setup changes. Yeah. My very short 2 cents on that.
Okay, fair enough.
Any other questions? Cool. Okay. Finally a reasonably short one. If you guys have any questions kind of after this, or are struggling with anything in phase one, or doesn't make sense, you kind of feel lost, just shout it out and tag me on either in coaching discussion or HOP, and I'll be happy to answer. And this one shouldn't take as long to upload, so hopefully it'll be ready tomorrow. Other than that, I'll wish you guys a great night. Thanks for showing up, and I should be good to run the next one next week, and that one will be probably a little bit longer because we'll talk about skills and whatnot. So yeah.
Thanks, Josiah. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, guys. Catch you guys soon.